The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small auto repair shop as Miguel Reyes wiped his greasy hands on a worn rag. The day had been long. 6 cars fixed, 2 oil changes, and a tricky transmission problem that had taken him most of the morning to solve. But that was life for a mechanic in the outskirts of Westridge, a town where the divide between the wealthy hillside residents and working folks like him grew wider each year. Miguel's small shop, Reyes Auto Repair, consisted of 2 service bays, a tiny waiting area with mismatched chairs, and walls covered with calendars from auto parts suppliers. It wasn't much, but it was his, built from scratch after years of working for others. At 32, he had managed to create something of his own, even if it meant working 12-hour days and sometimes wondering how he'd make rent. Heading out, boss called Tomas his part-time helper, a community college student studying engineering, left the Johnson pickup on the lift for tomorrow. Miguel nodded, giving the young man a thumbs up. Good work today. Those brake lines were a nightmare. As Tomas left, Miguel walked around his shop, tidying tools and making mental notes for tomorrow's jobs. This was his evening ritual. A quiet moment when the smell of motor oil and the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner were his only companions. He loved these moments almost as much as he loved fixing the most challenging mechanical problems. The sharp ring of his phone broke the silence. Miguel fished it out of his pocket, surprised to see his cousin Lucia's name on the screen. They usually only talked on Sundays or holidays. "Hey, Lucia, everything okay?" he asked, leaning against a workbench. "Miguel, I've been trying to reach you all day," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Listen, I might have something interesting for you." Lucia worked at the Grand Palace Hotel downtown, the kind of place Miguel drove past but never entered. It catered to the wealthy residents of Westridge Hills and business, travelers who wouldn't be caught dead bringing their luxury cars to his modest shop. "Remember how I told you, I'm working at these fancy events now? Well, there's this huge charity gala happening this Saturday. All the big shots in town will be there. Doctors, business owners, real estate developers. People who own nice cars, Miguel. People who could become customers," Miguel sighed. "Lucia, those people don't bring their BMWs to shops like mine. They go to those dealership service centers with the fancy waiting rooms and free espresso." "That's exactly my point," Lucia insisted. "They pay triple what you charge, and half of them get ripped off because they don't know the first thing about cars. You could change that." Miguel ran a hand through his thick black hair, leaving a smudge of grease he didn't notice. "And how exactly am I supposed to meet these people? Crash your hotel event?" "No, dummy. I got you an invitation." The pride in her voice was unmistakable. "One of the event organizers owed me a favor after I helped with her wedding last month. It's a charity thing for the Children's Hospital. Very fancy, very important. The perfect place for you to hand out some business cards and maybe make some connections." Miguel felt his stomach tighten. Social events weren't his thing, especially not high society gatherings where he'd stick out like a rusted bolt in a box of chrome fittings. "I don't know, Lucia." "Miguel Eduardo Reyes," she said, using his full name like their grandmother used to do when they were kids. "When was the last time you did something to grow your business besides fixing cars and hoping people tell their friends?" The question hit home. For years, Miguel had been saying he wanted to expand, maybe hire another full-time mechanic, perhaps even specialize in restoring classic cars, his true passion. But between keeping the shop running and paying bills, those dreams stayed just that, dreams. "I don't even have anything to wear to a fancy party," he said. "A last-week attempt at resistance, I thought of that. My boyfriend Jorge is about your size, and he has a nice blazer you can borrow. Nothing too fancy, but decent enough. You have clean pants that aren't covered in grease, right?" Miguel glanced down at his work uniform, stained with the evidence of a day's honest labor. "I might have something." "Good, I'll drop off the blazer tomorrow. The event starts at 7 on Saturday. Don't be late." She paused before adding more gently, "Miguel, you're the best mechanic in this town. It's time more people knew that." After hanging up, Miguel stood in the middle of his shop, feeling oddly unsettled. The invitation represented something he both wanted and feared, a chance to grow, to step beyond the comfortable boundaries of his small world. But also a step into a place where he might not belong. The next 2 days passed in a blur of work and growing anxiety. Lucia dropped off the blazer as promised, a navy blue number that fit well enough, though the sleeves were a bit short for Miguel's long arms. He dug out his one pair of decent black pants, a white button-up shirt that had thankfully remained free of stains, and his least worn pair of shoes, which he polished until he could almost see his reflection. Saturday evening arrived too quickly. Miguel stood in front of the small mirror in his apartment bathroom, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Without his work clothes and with his hair neatly combed, he looked different, less like the neighborhood mechanic and more like someone who might, just might, belong at a fancy charity event. But the hands gave him away. No amount of scrubbing could completely remove the ingrained traces of motor oil from his fingernails or the calluses from years of gripping tools. These were working hands, honest hands, but at a high society event, they would mark him as an outsider. Miguel had almost talked himself out of going when his phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "On my way to work. You better be getting ready. This could change everything for you." Her belief in him was the push he needed. Miguel tucked a small stack of newly printed business cards into his pocket, grabbed his keys, and headed out before he could change his mind. The Grand Palace Hotel stood like a gleaming monument to wealth in the center of downtown, its facade lit up with elegant lights that made the whole building glow against the darkening sky. Miguel parked his trusty but aging pickup truck several blocks away, not wanting to pull up to the valet stand in a vehicle that announced his working-class status before he even stepped out. The walk to the hotel gave him time to rehearse what he might say when meeting potential clients. "I specialize in European imports" sounded better than "I fix anything with an engine," even though both were equally true. Perhaps he would mention the vintage Mustang he'd restored last year, or the fact that he could diagnose problems that had stumped the dealership technicians. But as he approached the grand entrance, with its doormen in crisp uniforms and guests arriving in vehicles worth more than his entire shop, Miguel's carefully rehearsed introductions evaporated from his mind. A knot formed in his stomach, and for a moment he considered turning back. "You came." Lucia appeared suddenly at his side, looking professional in her hotel staff uniform. She had stepped outside for a quick break, anticipating his arrival. "I was worried you might chicken out." "I still might," Miguel admitted, watching a couple emerge from a sleek Jaguar. Lucia straightened his borrowed blazer and gave him an encouraging smile. "You look great. Just be yourself, the smart, hard-working guy who can fix anything. These people respect skill, even if they pretend not to." With a quick hug, she pressed an invitation card into his hand and disappeared back inside to resume her duties. Miguel took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked up the steps toward the entrance. The hotel lobby was a maze of marble and gleaming wood, but helpful signs directed charity gala attendees toward the grand ballroom. Miguel followed a well-dressed couple trying to mimic their confident stride while fighting the feeling that everyone could tell he didn't belong. The ballroom took his breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, casting a warm glow over round tables dressed in white linens. A small orchestra played in one corner, while uniformed servers circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres with names Miguel couldn't pronounce. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, the sound of people who were comfortable in their prosperity. Miguel accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, more to have something to do with his hands than from any desire to drink. He skirted the edge of the room, searching for Lucia but seeing only strangers in expensive clothes, all seeming to know exactly where they belonged and who they wanted to talk to. A man bumped into him, nearly causing Miguel to spill his drink. "Pardon me," the man said without really looking at Miguel, before rejoining a circle of laughing guests. Miguel took a small sip of champagne and winced at its dryness. This had been a mistake. What had he been thinking? That he could just walk up to these people and hand them his business card? That they would welcome him into their conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes? But as he considered making an early exit, Miguel overheard a conversation that caught his attention. Two men nearby were discussing a car, specifically a restoration project gone wrong, paid him a fortune, and the engine still makes that terrible noise, one of the men was saying. "Now he tells me it might be the transmission, which means another month of work and who knows how much more money." Without thinking, Miguel found himself stepping closer. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. I couldn't help overhearing. "What kind of car are you restoring?" The men turned, their expressions a mixture of surprise and mild annoyance at the interruption. But Miguel had opened a door, and for better or worse, he was stepping through it. The night was just beginning, and what would happen next would either confirm his worst fears or open a world of new possibilities. The two men looked Miguel up and down, their eyes lingering on his borrowed blazer with sleeves that were just a bit too short. The taller one, with silver hair and a tan that suggested recent travels to warmer places, gave a thin smile. "It's a '67 Corvette Stingray," he said. "Are you in the restoration business?" Miguel's heart quickened. Classic Corvettes were dreams on wheels, the kind of project he'd love to get his hands on. "I run an auto shop on the east side. Been fixing cars since I was 14, working with my uncle." "East side?" the second man said, exchanging a glance with his friend. "That's quite a drive from the hills. Do you specialize in classics?" "I work on everything," Miguel said, reaching for one of his business cards. "But classics are my passion. I restored a '65 Mustang last year that had been sitting in a barn for 20 years. Engine was seized, rust everywhere. By the time I finished, she purred like new." The silver-haired man took Miguel's card between two manicured fingers, as if worried the ink might rub off on his skin. He glanced at it briefly before tucking it into his pocket with a nod that made it clear the conversation was over. "We'll keep you in mind." They turned away, already resuming their previous conversation. Miguel stood awkwardly for a moment, then retreated to the edge of the room again, his confidence deflating. That hadn't gone as well as he'd hoped, but at least they took his card. He spotted a table with elaborate food displays and made his way over, thinking food might provide both comfort and something to do with his hands. The spread was like nothing he'd seen before. Tiny pastries filled with colorful ingredients, skewered seafood, and things he couldn't even identify. "First time at one of these events?" asked a friendly voice. Miguel turned to find a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a simple but elegant dress. She seemed less intimidating than most of the guests. "Is it that obvious?" he asked with a small laugh. "Only because you look as uncomfortable as I felt at my first charity gala," she said. "I'm Elena. My husband and I own the bookstore downtown." "Miguel. I have an auto repair shop on East Maple." Elena nodded approvingly. "A fellow small business owner. What brought you here tonight?" Miguel explained about his cousin's invitation and his hope of making connections. As they talked, he began to relax a little. Elena introduced him to her husband Theo, who shared Miguel's interest in vintage cars. "You should meet Raymond Wong," Theo suggested. "He has quite a collection of classics. I think he's over by the bar." With a renewed sense of purpose, Miguel thanked them and made his way across the room. Maybe this evening wouldn't be a waste after all. The bar area was crowded with people laughing and talking loudly, their voices growing more animated as the evening progressed and the drinks flowed freely. Miguel scanned the group, unsure which one might be Raymond Wong. "Excuse me," he said to a man who seemed less engaged in conversation. "I'm looking for Raymond Wong. I was told he's interested in classic cars." The man raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Miguel Reyes. I restore classic vehicles." "Ray's right there," the man pointed. "But he's a bit particular about who works on his collection." Miguel nodded his thanks and approached a well-dressed man in his 60s who was gesturing animatedly to a small group. He waited for a pause in the conversation before stepping forward. "Mr. Wong, I'm Miguel Reyes. Theo mentioned you have a collection of classic cars. I own an auto repair shop that also does restorations." Raymond Wong turned, his expression curious. "You restore classics? Where's your shop?" "East Maple Street. It's called Reyes Auto Repair." A tall, broad-shouldered man in the group chuckled. "East Maple? Isn't that next to that rundown laundromat?" Miguel felt heat rise to his face. "We've been there 8 years. It's a good location close to—" "Let me guess," the broad-shouldered man interrupted, his voice carrying enough that nearby conversations quieted. "You're one of Lucia's charity cases, aren't you? She's always trying to help the less fortunate." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Miguel became intensely aware of eyes turning toward him, of the difference between his borrowed clothes and their designer outfits. "I'm not a charity case," he said quietly but firmly. "I'm a business owner, just like many people here." The man looked at Miguel's hands and smirked. "With hands like that, I doubt you're just like anyone here. What happened? Couldn't get the grease off before the party?" A ripple of laughter spread through the group. Miguel looked down at his hands. Strong, capable hands that had fixed countless vehicles, hands that supported him and his small staff, hands he had never been ashamed of until this moment. Raymond Wong looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. The broad-shouldered man, encouraged by the laughter, continued. Hey, maybe we should introduce him to the kitchen staff. I hear the dishwasher called in sick. More laughter. A woman in an emerald dress added, or maybe he could check my car before I leave. The valet mentioned something about my brakes. Miguel stood frozen as the jokes continued, each one cutting deeper than the last. He thought of defending himself, of telling them about the complex problems he'd solved that had stumped dealership technicians, about the loyal customers who trusted him with vehicles they depended on. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't realize the help was invited to mingle, someone else chimed in. Maybe he's here to park the cars. Did someone call for a tow truck? The room seemed to spin slightly. Miguel had faced difficult situations before, growing up with little money, starting his business from nothing, weathering economic downturns, but nothing had prepared him for this public humiliation, this casual cruelty from people who knew nothing about him. He spotted Lucia across the room, her face stricken as she realized what was happening. She started moving toward him, but was stopped by her supervisor who whispered something urgent in her ear. Miguel backed away from the group, their laughter following him. He bumped into a server, causing glasses of champagne to crash to the floor. The sound of shattering glass momentarily silenced the room. Sorry, he mumbled, kneeling instinctively to help clean up the mess. Please. Sir, we'll handle it, the server said quietly, a flash of sympathy in his eyes, rising slowly. Miguel became aware of dozens of stares, some amused, some embarrassed for him, some simply curious about the disruption to their evening. He no longer belonged here, if he ever had. He made his way to a quiet corner of the ballroom near a service entrance where fewer people lingered. His heart pounded in his chest and his throat felt tight. What had he been thinking, believing he could step into this world? These people wouldn't bring their precious vehicles to his shop. They wouldn't see beyond his work-roughened hands and his East Side address. A waiter emerged from the service door carrying a tray of fresh drinks. Seeing Miguel, he paused. Are you all right, sir? Miguel nodded, not trusting his voice. The waiter glanced over his shoulder, then spoke in a low voice. I heard what those people said. Don't let them get to you. Half of them couldn't change a tire if their life depended on it. The small gesture of kindness nearly undid Miguel completely. He managed a weak smile as the waiter continued on his rounds. For several minutes, Miguel stood in his corner, gathering his composure and planning his exit. He would find Lucia later, thank her for trying, and never speak of this night again. He would go back to his shop, to his world, where people valued his skills rather than mocking them. As he edged toward the exit, he heard a commotion near the main stage where the charity auction was set to begin. A woman in an expensive suit was speaking urgently into a phone, her face pinched with worry. What do you mean it won't start? The auction begins in 20 minutes. It's the centerpiece. Miguel hesitated. He should leave, put this humiliating evening behind him. But something made him pause. Professional curiosity, perhaps, or simply the instinct to help when someone had a problem he might be able to fix. He moved closer, catching fragments of the conversation. Vintage. Jaguar E-Type, supposed to drive it onto the stage, stuck in the loading dock. Mechanic says he can't make it until morning. The woman ended her call with a frustrated sigh, turning to a man in a tuxedo, who appeared to be one of the event organizers. The Jaguar won't start. Jenkins says it just died when they tried to move it from the truck. The owner is going to be furious. He only agreed to display it if we handled everything perfectly. Can't we just push it onto the stage? The man suggested. And announce to everyone that our showcase auction item is broken? Thomas, we're trying to get people to bid on a driving experience in this car. No one's going to bid if they think it doesn't run. Miguel stood nearby, torn between self-preservation and the pull of a problem he might be able to solve. These people had just humiliated him. He owed them nothing. Walking away would be the sensible choice. But that Jaguar, an E-Type, was automotive royalty, a perfect blend of beauty and engineering. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this might be an opportunity, though for what he wasn't quite sure. The woman noticed him hovering and frowned. Can I help you? Miguel took a deep breath. This moment would either compound his humiliation or change the trajectory of the evening entirely. Either way, he couldn't walk away from a car in need, especially not one as special as an E-Type Jaguar. Actually, he said, meeting her eyes steadily, I think I might be able to help you. The woman in the expensive suit looked Miguel up and down, her eyes lingering on his hands, the same hands that had just moments ago been the subject of mockery. Now they might be exactly what she needed. You're a mechanic? She asked, hope and doubt battling in her voice. I own an auto repair shop, Miguel replied, straightening his shoulders slightly. I've worked on vintage cars before, including Jaguars. The man in the tuxedo, Thomas, exchanged a skeptical glance with the woman. Patricia, we don't have time for this. The auction starts in minutes. Patricia bit her lip, weighing her limited options. Do you know E-Type specifically? She asked Miguel. I restored a '64 E-Type coupe 2 years ago, Miguel said. It had been one of his proudest achievements, taking a neglected classic and bringing it back to its former glory. The owner had almost cried when Miguel handed over the keys. What seems to be the problem with this one? Patricia hesitated only a moment longer before making her decision. It's in the loading area. Can you at least take a look? We're desperate. Miguel nodded and she quickly led him through a service corridor, away from the ballroom's judgmental eyes. Thomas followed, speaking urgently into his phone, likely updating someone about their last-ditch effort to save the auction centerpiece. The loading dock was a stark contrast to the opulence of the ballroom. Concrete floors, metal rolling doors, and bright fluorescent lighting that left nowhere to hide. And there it was, in all its glory. A 1963 Jaguar E-Type Roadster in British racing green, its long, sleek body gleaming under the harsh lights. Even sitting motionless, it looked like it was doing 100 miles per hour. A man in coveralls, presumably the hotel's maintenance worker, stood beside it, looking defeated. A small crowd had gathered around the vehicle. The event staff, the delivery crew, and a few people who seemed important based on their expensive attire. This is the mechanic I mentioned, Patricia announced, gesturing to Miguel. Several eyebrows raised at his appearance, but desperation outweighed their doubts. Miguel approached the Jaguar with reverence. These cars weren't just machines. They were rolling artwork, engineering masterpieces. He ran his hand along the smooth curve of the hood. What happened exactly? He asked the maintenance worker. It was running fine when they loaded it on the truck, the man explained. But when they tried to start it to drive it down the ramp, it just died. Won't turn over now. Miguel nodded, already mentally running through the most common issues with vintage British sports cars. When was the last time it was driven regularly? A well-dressed older man stepped forward. It's from my private collection. I drive it maybe once a month, mostly to keep it in working order. Never had any problems before today, the car's owner, Miguel, guessed. Mind if I take a look under the hood? The owner nodded and Miguel carefully released the hood latch, lifting it to reveal the straight-six engine beneath. It was immaculately maintained, each component gleaming as if it had just left the factory in Coventry. Beautiful, Miguel murmured. Genuinely impressed, it should be, the owner said, a note of pride in his voice. I've spent a small fortune keeping it original. Miguel began his inspection, methodically checking the most likely culprits. The crowd around him grew as word spread that there was drama unfolding in the loading dock. He was vaguely aware of whispers and the occasional flash of recognition from those who had witnessed his humiliation in the ballroom earlier. Can you fix it? Patricia asked anxiously, checking her watch. We have 15 minutes before it needs to be on stage. I'm still diagnosing the problem, Miguel replied calmly, continuing his work. His embarrassment from earlier faded as he focused on the task at hand. Here, surrounded by engine parts and the smell of gasoline, he was in his element. No one could take that away from him. He checked the battery connections, tight. Fuel lines, clear. The ignition system seemed intact. But something caught his eye. A small fuel filter that looked newer than the surrounding components. When was this fuel filter installed? He asked the owner. The man thought for a moment. Last week. My regular mechanic said it needed replacing. Miguel nodded slowly. I think I see the problem. This isn't the correct filter for this model. The flow rate is wrong, and it's causing fuel starvation when the engine's under load. The owner frowned. But it started fine at my home. Starting it in a garage is different from driving it up a loading ramp, Miguel explained. Under strain, it's not getting enough fuel, so it stalls. And now there's air in the line, which is why it won't restart. A murmur went through the crowd. Miguel turned to the maintenance worker. Do you have any tools I could use? The man nodded and hurried away, returning moments later with a basic toolbox. Miguel quickly surveyed the contents. Not ideal, but he could make it work. What do you need? The owner asked, now fully invested in Miguel's diagnosis. Ideally the correct filter, Miguel said, but we don't have time for that. I'm going to bypass the filter temporarily. It's not a permanent solution, but it should get the car running for tonight. He got to work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the growing pressure of time and the audience watching his every move. This was what he was born to do. Solve problems that others couldn't. Bring machines back to life when they seemed beyond hope. Thomas approached Patricia, speaking in a hushed voice that Miguel could still hear. Are we really trusting a complete stranger with $1 million car? Patricia shot him a warning look. Do you have a better idea? The auction starts in 10 minutes. Miguel ignored their conversation, focusing entirely on the task at hand. He carefully removed the problematic filter, working to ensure no debris entered the fuel system. Then, using parts from the toolbox and a bit of ingenuity, he created a temporary bypass that would allow fuel to flow freely to the engine. Could you try starting it now? He asked the owner, stepping back from the engine bay. The owner slid into the driver's seat, his expensive suit looking somewhat out of place in the sporting cockpit. He turned the key and the engine cranked but didn't catch. Give it another try, Miguel encouraged. Sometimes it takes a moment for the fuel to reach the carburetors. The second attempt yielded the same result. The crowd's energy shifted, doubts creeping back in. Miguel could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions about whether this East Side mechanic was in over his head. One more time, he said confidently, making a small adjustment, and pump the gas pedal twice before you crank it. The owner did as instructed. This time, the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with the distinctive growl that made E-Types legendary. The sound echoed through the loading dock, and spontaneous applause broke out among the onlookers. Relief washed over Patricia's face. Thank goodness, she breathed, clutching her clipboard to her chest. Can it be driven onto the stage now? Miguel nodded, closing the hood carefully. It should be fine. Just don't shut it off until after the auction. And I'd recommend getting that proper filter installed before it's driven any distance. The owner stepped out of the car, extending his hand to Miguel. That was impressive work, especially with limited tools and time. I don't believe I caught your name. Miguel Reyes, he replied, shaking the man's hand. Reyes Auto Repair on East Maple. Recognition flickered in the owner's eyes. You're the mechanic everyone was talking about upstairs. Miguel tensed, waiting for another jab about his hands or his borrowed blazer. Instead, the man surprised him. Well, they clearly had no idea what they were talking about. You just saved this auction and my car. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. I have 6 more classics in my collection. I'd like you to take a look at them sometime. Before Miguel could respond, Patricia was ushering everyone into position. The Jaguar needed to make its grand entrance, and there was no time to waste. The owner slid back behind the wheel, and a staff member directed him toward a ramp that led up to the ballroom. Miguel stepped back, watching as the beautiful machine pulled away, its engine note perfect now that it was receiving the fuel it needed. A mix of emotions swirled within him, pride in his work, satisfaction at solving the problem, and a lingering sense of vindication. That was quite something, said a voice beside him. Miguel turned to find Elena, the bookstore owner he'd met earlier. I saw what happened upstairs. Those people were cruel, Miguel shrugged. It doesn't matter now. It does matter, Elena insisted. But what matters more is what you just did. Not everyone would have helped after being treated that way. More guests from the ballroom had filtered into the loading area, drawn by the commotion. Among them, Miguel spotted the broad-shouldered man who had started the mockery earlier. Their eyes met briefly, and the man looked away first. You should come back upstairs, Elena suggested. The auction's about to start, and I have a feeling you might want to see this. Miguel hesitated. Part of him wanted to leave, to escape the ballroom and its painful memories. But another part, a stronger part, wanted to see the Jaguar make its entrance, to witness the culmination of his work. All right, he agreed. As they walked back toward the ballroom, Miguel became aware of a subtle shift in how people looked at him. The glances were no longer dismissive or amused. There was curiosity now, and in some cases, respect. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the loading dock. The mechanic who had been the butt of jokes just minutes earlier had saved the auction's prized centerpiece. It was the kind of reversal people loved to witness, an underdog story unfolding before their eyes. They reached the ballroom just as the lights dimmed slightly and an announcer's voice boomed through the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that we present the highlight of tonight's charity auction. A 1963 Jaguar E-Type Roadster, one of the most beautiful cars ever created. A spotlight hit the side entrance as the green Jaguar rolled smoothly into the room, its engine purring contentedly. Gasps and applause filled the air as the classic sports car circled the perimeter of the ballroom, before coming to rest on the raised platform that had been prepared for it. Standing at the back of the crowd, Miguel watched with quiet satisfaction. The car that many had feared would be an embarrassment had instead become the star of the show, thanks to him. And as the auctioneer began extolling the virtues of the magnificent machine, Miguel realized that something had changed. He had entered this room as an outsider, someone to be mocked and dismissed. Now he stood as someone who had proven his worth in the most convincing way possible, not with words or appearances, but with skill and knowledge that no one could deny. The night was still young, and what had begun as a humiliation was transforming into something entirely different, an opportunity that Miguel could never have anticipated. The auctioneer's voice filled the ballroom as the bidding for the Jaguar began. Miguel watched from the back, still processing the sudden turn his evening had taken. Helena stood beside him, a knowing smile on her face. Starting bid is $50,000, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 50,000? Hands went up around the room. The bidding quickly escalated as wealthy collectors competed for the stunning vehicle. Miguel marveled at the amounts being called out so casually, sums that would have paid his shop's rent for years. I should thank you, Elena said quietly. My husband and I donate to the Children's Hospital every year. The more money they raise tonight, the more children they can help. Miguel nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of satisfaction. His skills had not only saved the auction, but would indirectly help sick kids. Maybe the humiliation he'd endured earlier had been worth it after all. As the bidding continued, Miguel noticed people glancing his way, whispering to each other. The story of what had happened in the loading dock was making its rounds. He shifted uncomfortably under the attention but held his ground. $150,000, the auctioneer called. Going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Wong. Applause filled the room as Raymond Wong, the classic car collector Miguel had attempted to speak with earlier, raised his paddle in triumph. The Jaguar's engine still purred contentedly on the stage, a testament to Miguel's handiwork. And now, the auctioneer continued once the applause died down, I've been informed that we have someone special to thank for making this auction possible tonight. He gestured toward the back of the room. Mr. Miguel Reyes, could you please join us on stage? Miguel froze. All eyes in the ballroom turned toward him. This wasn't part of the plan. He'd been ready to slip away quietly once the auction was complete, perhaps with a few new contacts in his pocket. Go on, Elena encouraged, giving him a gentle push forward. You earned this moment. Heart-pounding, Miguel made his way through the crowd. People stepped aside, creating a path for him. Some nodded in acknowledgement. Others, including a few who had laughed at him earlier, avoided his gaze. As he approached the stage, Patricia gave him a grateful smile and Thomas, the event organizer, extended a hand to help him up the steps. The spotlight felt blindingly bright, but Miguel forced himself to stand tall, uncomfortable but determined not to show it. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer said, I'm told that just 30 minutes ago our beautiful Jaguar refused to start. Without Mr. Reyes's quick thinking and expertise, this auction would not have been possible. Let's show our appreciation. The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. Miguel caught sight of his cousin Lucia beaming proudly from the side of the room. The car's owner joined him on stage, shaking his hand vigorously. Mr. Reyes owns Reyes Auto Repair on East Maple Street, the owner announced, taking the microphone. And after what I witnessed tonight, I can tell you there's no one I'd rather trust with my collection. This man did in 10 minutes what my regular mechanic couldn't figure out in a week. More applause. Miguel felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, vindication, and an unexpected sense of belonging. The same room that had been the site of his humiliation was now acknowledging his worth. The auctioneer handed Miguel the microphone. He stared at it for a moment, unprepared for this turn of events. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, and he'd certainly never addressed a room full of the town's elite. He cleared his throat. "Thank you," he began simply. "I'm just glad I could help." He could have handed the microphone back then, but something compelled him to continue. Maybe it was the memory of those mocking laughs, or maybe it was seeing the respect now evident in those same faces. "I've loved cars since I was a kid," he said, his voice growing stronger. "To me, there's nothing more beautiful than a machine that's been designed and built with care, whether it's $1 million Jaguar or a family sedan that gets you to work every day. Every vehicle deserves respect, and so does every person who works on them." He glanced around the room, making brief eye contact with the broad-shouldered man who had started the mockery earlier. The man looked away, but Miguel continued. "You don't need soft hands to appreciate beautiful things. Sometimes it's the roughest hands that create and preserve beauty. That's what I try to do every day at my shop." With that, he handed the microphone back to the auctioneer and made his way off the stage amid renewed applause. He hadn't planned those words, but they had come from a place of truth. A lifetime of being underestimated because of where he came from and what he did for a living. As he reached the bottom of the steps, people surrounded him. The atmosphere had changed completely. Now everyone seemed eager to speak with him, to share stories about their own cars, to ask his opinion on various mechanical issues. Business cards appeared from expensive suit pockets, pressed into his hands with invitations to call my office and take a look at my collection. "Mr. Reyes," said a voice behind him. Miguel turned to find Raymond Wong, the winning bidder of the Jaguar. "That was quite impressive work. Thank you, sir. Congratulations on your new car." Wong smiled. "I have a feeling it was worth every penny, especially after seeing how well it runs. Listen, I wasn't exaggerating earlier. I have several vintage cars that need attention. My current mechanic is, well, let's just say he's not working out. Would you be interested in taking a look at my collection?" Before Miguel could answer, another collector joined them, equally eager to discuss his problematic Ferrari. Then came a woman with questions about her 1950s Mercedes, and a man wondering if Miguel could restore his grandfather's old pickup truck. Miguel found himself at the center of a crowd, fielding questions about everything from routine maintenance to complete restorations. These were the same people who had looked through him earlier, or worse, looked down on him. Now they were hanging on his every word, treating his opinions with reverence. It was a heady experience, but Miguel kept his feet on the ground. He answered each question thoughtfully, never promising more than he could deliver, explaining complex mechanical issues in terms anyone could understand. This was something he'd always been good at, translating the language of machines for those who drove them but didn't understand them. "You're a natural," Elena commented when she managed to reach him through the crowd. "You should see the transformation. An hour ago they were mocking your hands. Now they're hoping those same hands will touch their precious cars." Miguel smiled. People respect skill. They just needed a reminder. As the evening progressed, Miguel found himself in conversations he never expected to have at an event like this. He discussed business expansion with a bank executive who offered to set up a meeting next week. He talked shop with other entrepreneurs who shared their experiences growing small businesses into larger operations. He even found himself giving impromptu advice to a young waiter who mentioned his interest in becoming a mechanic. Lucia finally broke free from her duties long enough to give Miguel a quick hug. "I told you this would change everything," she whispered excitedly. "But even I didn't expect this." "You're the star of the night," Miguel laughed. "Let's not get carried away. I just fixed a car." "You did more than that," she insisted. "You showed them all who you really are." As the event began to wind down, Miguel found himself exchanging contact information with more potential clients than he could count. His phone buzzed constantly with new connections on social media as people looked up his business on the spot. The shop's Instagram following doubled in a single hour. The broad-shouldered man who had started the mockery earlier approached hesitantly, his earlier confidence notably diminished. "Listen," he said, not quite meeting Miguel's eyes. "About earlier, I was out of line." It wasn't exactly an apology, but Miguel recognized it as the closest thing to one that a man like this was likely to offer. He could have rejected it, could have savored a moment of petty revenge, but that wasn't who he was. "It's forgotten," Miguel said simply, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, the man shook it. As the evening came to a close, Patricia approached Miguel one last time. "I can't thank you enough," she said. "The auction raised more money than we expected. The hospital board is ecstatic. I'm glad I could help," Miguel replied sincerely. "We host these charity events quarterly," she continued. "Would you be interested in joining our list of sponsors? It would just mean donating a small service, maybe a free oil change for a raffle prize. It would get your business name in our program." Miguel considered the offer. Just hours ago, he'd been an outsider trying desperately to fit in. Now he was being invited to become a part of this world on his own terms, recognized for what he could contribute rather than judged for where he came from. "I'd be happy to," he said. "In fact, I could offer something better than an oil change. What about a classic car maintenance workshop? I could teach basic care for vintage vehicles. Might be popular with some of your collectors." Patricia's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. I can already think of a dozen people who would sign up." As Miguel finally made his way toward the exit, he paused to look back at the ballroom. The Jaguar still sat on its platform, gleaming under the lights. The evening had been a roller coaster of emotions, from hope to humiliation to unexpected triumph. He had arrived seeking a few business cards and would leave with something far more valuable: respect. Outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing after the stuffy ballroom. Miguel loosened his borrowed tie and took a deep breath. His phone buzzed again. Another new follow for his business account, another potential client. As he walked to his truck, he thought about the shop he'd return to tomorrow. It was still the same modest place on East Maple, with its mismatched chairs and calendars on the walls. But something had changed. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities that hadn't existed just hours ago. The evening had reminded him of something important. True worth isn't measured by the clothes you wear or the circles you move in. It's measured by what you can do, what you can create, what you can fix when others have given up. And by that measure, Miguel Reyes had always been wealthy beyond counting. He started his old pickup truck, its familiar rumble a comfort after the evening's events. As he pulled away from the Grand Palace Hotel, he couldn't help but smile. He had arrived as an outsider, endured as the butt of cruel jokes, and would leave as the mechanic everyone wanted to know. Life had a funny way of evening the score. 3 years had passed since that fateful night at the Grand Palace Hotel. Miguel stood at the entrance of his new workshop, keys in hand, still hardly believing that this place belonged to him. The morning sun glinted off the polished sign above the door. Reyes Classic Restorations. Gone was the small shop on East Maple with its mismatched chairs and calendars on the walls. In its place was this: a spacious state-of-the-art facility with 5 service bays, specialized equipment, and a client waiting area that rivaled any luxury car dealership. The concrete floors gleamed with a professional finish, and the walls were adorned with framed photographs of completed restorations, each one telling a story of rebirth and renewal. Miguel unlocked the door and stepped inside, savoring the moment of quiet before his team arrived. The familiar smells of motor oil, leather conditioner, and the faint hint of metal polish greeted him. These were the scents of his life's work, the elements of his success. "Morning, boss," called a voice from the parking lot. Miguel turned to see Thomas, his former part-time helper who was now his full-time master technician. The young man had completed his engineering degree but had chosen to stay with Miguel rather than pursue a corporate job. "Ready for the big reveal today?" Miguel nodded. "As ready as we'll ever be. Today was special. After 6 months of painstaking work, they would be unveiling their most ambitious restoration project yet, a 1938 Bugatti Type 57 that had been discovered in a barn in France, neglected for decades. The owner, a software entrepreneur who had made his fortune in Silicon Valley, had sought out Miguel specifically for the job, having heard about his reputation for bringing automotive treasures back from the brink. The restoration had been featured in several car magazines and online publications. A film crew from a popular streaming service had documented the process for a series on master craftspeople. And today, the completed car would be revealed to its owner and a select audience of classic car enthusiasts and potential clients. As Miguel walked through his shop, checking that everything was perfect for the event, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. That night at the charity gala had changed everything, though not overnight. The transformation had been gradual, built on hard work and a steadfast commitment to quality. The morning after the gala, Miguel had arrived at his old shop to find Raymond Wong waiting for him, keys to a 1955 Mercedes Gullwing in hand. That first high-profile project had led to others, as word spread about the mechanic with the magic touch who could solve problems others couldn't. Within 6 months, Miguel's calendar was booked solid with work on prestigious vehicles, forcing him to hire additional help and extend his business hours. A year later, he had secured a small business loan to expand, renovating the shop and investing in specialized tools. By the second anniversary of the gala, the demand for his services had outgrown the original location entirely, leading to the purchase of this new facility on the west side of town. Ironically, much closer to the wealthy clients who now made up the bulk of his business. But Miguel had never forgotten his roots. When he moved the business, he made sure to bring Thomas with him, along with the other skilled mechanics he had trained. He maintained fair prices for regular maintenance work, refusing to become exclusively high-end, and offered apprenticeships to young people from working-class neighborhoods like the one he'd grown up in. The sound of cars pulling into the parking lot broke his reverie. His team was arriving, a diverse group of talented individuals who shared his passion for automotive craftsmanship. There was Lisa, the paint specialist whose work was so precise it seemed almost supernatural. Denny, the upholstery expert who could recreate any interior from a single photograph. Carlos, the electrical systems wizard, and half a dozen others, each bringing unique skills to the table. "Everything set for the big show?" asked Lisa, tying her hair back as she entered. "Almost," Miguel replied. "Just need to do one final check on the Bugatti." The car sat in the center of the main bay, still hidden beneath a custom cover. They had worked countless hours on this machine, solving problems that would have defeated less determined restorers. There had been moments of frustration, technical challenges that seemed insurmountable, but they had persevered, driven by Miguel's unwavering belief that anything could be fixed with enough patience and ingenuity. By mid-morning, the shop had transformed from a working garage into something resembling an upscale event venue. Catering staff arranged refreshments, photographers set up their equipment, and a string quartet tuned their instruments in the corner. It was a far cry from the humble open house Miguel had held when he first opened his small shop on East Maple. As noon approached, guests began to arrive: collectors, enthusiasts, industry journalists, and even a few celebrities known for their car collections. Miguel greeted each one personally, no longer the outsider trying desperately to fit in. Now he moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, discussing restoration techniques and upcoming projects with people who valued his expertise. He spotted Elena and Theo, the bookstore owners who had shown him kindness on that first night, now regular attendees at his events. Raymond Wong arrived with a group of fellow collectors, nodding respectfully to Miguel as he entered. Even the broad-shouldered man who had once mocked Miguel's oil-stained hands was there, having eventually become a client after his prized Porsche developed a mysterious issue that no one else could diagnose. "There he is," called a familiar voice. Miguel turned to see Lucia approaching, elegant in a dress that reflected her recent promotion to events manager at the Grand Palace. They embraced warmly. "I'm so proud of you, cousin. Look at all this." "I couldn't have done it without you," Miguel said sincerely. "If you hadn't pushed me to go to that gala," Lucia grinned, "you would have gotten here eventually. I just sped up the timeline." As 2 o'clock approached, Miguel gathered everyone around the covered Bugatti. The owner, a tech mogul named Philip, stood beside him, practically vibrating with anticipation. Cameras flashed and the room fell silent as Miguel stepped forward to speak. "3 years ago," he began, his voice clear and confident, "I went to an event where I felt completely out of place. My hands were too rough, my clothes weren't expensive enough, and I didn't know which fork to use for the salad." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. Many of them had heard the story of that night, how it had become part of the Miguel Reyes legend. "That night taught me something important," he continued. "It taught me that true worth isn't about appearances or social status. It's about what you can create, what you can fix, what you can bring back to life when others have given up." He gestured to the covered car. This Bugatti was considered beyond saving by many experts. The engine was seized, the body was badly corroded, and most of the original parts were missing or damaged beyond repair. But we refused to give up on it. Because at Reyes Classic Restorations, we believe that nothing is beyond saving if you have the right skills, the right tools, and the determination to see it through. With that, Miguel nodded to Tomas, who helped him carefully remove the cover to reveal the Bugatti in all its restored glory. Gasps filled the room as the legendary vehicle was unveiled, its midnight blue paint gleaming under the lights, chrome work sparkling like jewelry, the leather interior rich and inviting. It was no longer a rusted shell but a masterpiece reborn, every detail perfect, every curve exactly as the original designers had intended nearly a century ago. Applause erupted, and Philip stepped forward, openly emotional at the sight of his restored treasure. "Miguel," he said, his voice thick, "you didn't just restore a car, you brought a piece of history back to life." As the guests moved forward to examine the Bugatti up close, Miguel stepped back, watching with quiet satisfaction. This was why he did what he did. Not for the recognition or the financial success, though both had come in abundance, but for moments like this. Moments of pure appreciation for craftsmanship and dedication. Later, as the event was winding down, Miguel noticed a young man hanging back from the crowd, studying the tools and equipment with undisguised interest. He was maybe 17, dressed simply in jeans and a t-shirt, clearly not part of the wealthy collector crowd. "Can I help you?" Miguel asked, approaching him. The young man jumped slightly, embarrassed at being noticed. "Sorry, I know this is a private event. I was just curious. I've read about your shop online." Instead of asking him to leave, Miguel smiled. "Are you interested in cars?" "Yes, sir," the young man replied eagerly. "I've been fixing up my grandfather's old truck. Nothing fancy like these, but every project matters," Miguel said. "I started with oil changes and brake jobs. The fancy stuff came later." The young man nodded, his eyes moving back to the Bugatti. "I never knew cars could be like that. It's like art." "It is art," Miguel agreed. "Just a different kind. One that moves and breathes and takes you places." He studied the young man for a moment, seeing something of himself in those eager eyes. "We have an apprenticeship program, you know, for young people who want to learn restoration work. The next session starts in a month." The young man's eyes widened. "Really? But I don't have any professional experience." "Neither did I when I started," Miguel said. "What you need is passion and a willingness to learn." "Do you have those?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely." Miguel pulled out a business card, now embossed with the Reyes Classic Restorations logo, and handed it to him. "Call this number on Monday. Ask for me. We'll set up a proper interview." The gratitude in the young man's face reminded Miguel of himself at that age, hungry for opportunity, for a chance to prove himself in a world that often judged too quickly based on appearances or background. As the day came to a close and the last guests departed, Miguel found himself alone again in his shop, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the cars that had brought him here. The Bugatti sat in silent dignity under the lights, a testament to what was possible when skill met opportunity. His phone buzzed with a notification, another feature story about the restoration, already generating buzz online. His business was thriving, his reputation secure, his future bright. But as he looked around at what he had built, Miguel knew that his greatest achievement wasn't the beautiful facility or the prestigious client list, or even the remarkable cars he had restored. It was the legacy he was creating, a place where skill was valued above status, where young people with rough hands and big dreams could find a path forward, where beauty could be created and preserved by anyone with the passion to do so. That was the true redemption story, not just his personal success, but the doors he could now open for others like him. The young man he'd met today might someday stand where Miguel stood now, looking back on a night when someone had seen his potential rather than his limitations. And that, Miguel thought as he turned off the lights and locked up his shop, was something no one would ever forget.